Everybody, Marcus here. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're on Instagram Live, Facebook Live, or YouTube. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about salmon today. Salmon, organic salmon versus wild salmon. What is the difference? First of all, this topic came up because somebody recently said to me, it was Marcus, just this new restaurant that I want to tell you about. The chef is, up just on food, just like you are. He's knowledgeable. He's farm to table. So I go on the website and start looking at the menu, and I see organic farmed Scottish salmon on the menu. And I'm looking at the menu. I'm looking at a couple other things, but that's my first clue, folks. When people say that they're into sustainable food, the website said sustainable all over it, farm to table, said all that kind of mumbo jumbo on it, on the restaurant website. When a restaurant claims they're serving sustainable food and then they put farmed salmon on their menu, that is the farthest thing you can get from sustainability. The farthest thing. Farmed salmon is worse than beef, than feedlot beef, consolidated feedlot beef coming out of like Montford or IBP. Farmed salmon is terrible, farthest thing from sustainability. And here's why. So first of all, this restaurant particularly was advertising that they had Scottish, organic Scottish salmon. First of all, I'm not even sure if the USDA has actually made an official organic standard for fish yet. They were working on it. There wasn't one a couple years ago. I'm not sure if it's been in place yet. I tried to do a quick Google search, and I actually got onto the USDA site, and they said there is no certification for organic fish, organic seafood. But one of the certifications one of the parts of that certification, the proposed certification for organic fish, was that 25% of its food had to be sourced from wild food sources. Only 25% had to be sourced from wild food sources. Now, that's good and bad, because of course salmon is one of those things where farmed salmon, it's almost impossible to do the right thing in salmon because of the way that it's being raised. It's very, very hard to even come close. And the salmon industry has cleaned their act up a little bit. What they've done a better job, instead of cleaning their act up, is they've done a better job in marketing what they want us to think they're doing. That's what this farm salmon industry has really come to. They're great marketers. It's amazing. And the reason why, they have people like Martha Stewart on their side, and Rick Moon, the godfather of sustainable seafood, have all bought in and gotten paid big bucks by these salmon farm companies. Go and say, look at the salmon farms, and this is good salmon, and this and that. So the first thing with salmon farms is that everything happens under the water. You don't see. You can drive by Montford or by IBP, these massive beef consolidators, and see 5 miles of feedlots and see the animals out there. Salmon you can't see because they're underneath the water, and they don't want you to see what's underneath the water. All right. So if you drove by a beef feedlot and you saw 25% of the animals dead lying there, you'd be like, I'm never going to eat that beef again, because that's disgusting. The animals are so filthy, they're dying left and right. But that's in reality what happens with salmon. Salmon, they die left and right. The mortality rate on salmon is insane. I just did a video last week on the algae blooms that are happening around salmon farms, and just literally killing off 200,000 fish at a time in these salmon farms, and they have to literally pump everything out. In the summertime, they don't get to pump out the fish quick enough when the salmon mortality happens. It happens with viruses, the algae blooms. It happens with several different reasons why the salmon farm just dies off, the whole thing. And again, going back to the main principle, is it's almost impossible to do the right thing with a bad start. There's farm salmon. So one of the stipulations for the farm salmon was that organic farm salmon is that you're allowed to have open pen nets. Open pen nets, folks, are a disaster. Very, 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 very few salmon farms are actually in a containment system where they're located inland. So what's happening is these net pens, they call them open net pens, they're sitting outside in the bays, just sitting in the bays, and they have holes in them. The salmon stay inside. But what happens is when the salmon go to the bathroom, when the salmon get diseases and viruses and sea lice, all that stuff escapes into the wild and hurts the wild population of salmon. So even if the salmon says organic, we're talking about organic farmed Scottish salmon, it's no better. It's barely better than regular farm salmon. Barely better. Again, what's better in that is the salmon farm's marketing. Their marketing makes you think that the salmon farm is better, or that the so-called organic. Folks, as far as I know right now, and I did do some research, there is no USDA certification for organic salmon, organic fish. That doesn't exist. I know they were putting proposals in place. I tried to do some research before this video to make sure I wouldn't be misquoted, but I went on to the USDA organic certification site. I'm looking through certifications. I did not see any salmon or fish certifications on there. In fact, it said that there is nothing in place yet. There's a proposal in place, and here's the list of the things you need to do. So again, folks, I'm doing this video. I'm here to educate you about the downsides of salmon, farm salmon especially, and even organic farm salmon. Because a lot of organic farm salmon, people think organic farm salmon is, oh, wow, it's so much better. And even chefs. So literally a person just within the last day said to me, Marcus, there's this farm-to-table restaurant that you're probably going to like. The chef thinks like you. He's into sustainability. It's a really cool place. I go online. I look it up. I'm looking at it, and it says sustainable farm to table commitment, all that, all over the website, and then I look at the menu, and the first thing that pops up on their menu is organic farmed Scottish salmon. So that's the last thing that a conscious-minded chef would serve is farm salmon. That's the last thing. Farm salmon in open pen nets, and you can get containment salmon, but it's still being fed there's still downsides to a containment system, but it's light speeds ahead of typical open pen net farm salmon. All right. So anytime you raise something in a farm, you're going to have some kind of consequences, because you're literally defying Mother Nature, because you're packing things so close together, much closer than they would live in the wild. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to be able to avoid all farmed items, because that's just what's in our food supply. And there are some, like I said, there are some better salmon farms, containment system. There are some better shrimp farms. There are some better, certain types of farms. But ultimately there are some things that you can literally say that, well, that's not equivalent to the wild because it doesn't have access to this, and this, or this. One of the biggest downfalls of salmon, farm salmon, is that they're allowed to put into its feed a synthetic anisacethin. Anisacethin is the pigment that the krill eat. Krill eat chlorella in the ocean. The salmon eat the krill, and the salmon turn pink or orange from all the krill it eats, because the carotenoid in the anisacethin in the chlorella is what gives the color. So it goes right down the supply chain. The krill eat the chlorella, the salmon eat the krill, and the color keeps going through. So it just concentrates through. In fish, when they say they give no colorings, folks, when they say, well, there's no coloring, added, they're giving it a synthetic petroleum-based anisacethin, which is then not approved for human consumption, by the way. You could never buy synthetic chlorella, synthetic anisacethin, so the synthetic pigment, the carotenoid, the synthetic antioxidant. You could never buy it for human consumption. It was only made for the fish industry, for salmon, and only approved for livestock, for aquaculture consumption. So when they tell you that, that's a whole, again, folks, the one thing that farm salmon has done very, very well in improving their image is their marketing. They've improved their marketing drastically because they know that you and I are on to them. They know that consumers are on to what's happening in salmon farms, the filth, the die-off, the disease, the antibiotics, the food colorings. I just had somebody call me from Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. I had somebody just call me. Somebody friended me on Facebook and called me and said, Marcus, we're freaking out here right now. She's in a community up there in this bay, and they're proposing all these salmon farms that'll be in by next year. We're freaking out right now because the community here knows that the lobster fishermen know, everybody here in the community knows they're going to put the salmon farms in here and they're going to destroy our bay. They're totally going to destroy our bay. This is near the Bay of Fundy. And the Bay of Fundy in Canada is known to have turbulent, cold waters. The salmon farms love that because the turbulence mimics salmon swimming. So the salmon supposedly build a little more muscle strength. The salmon build a little more muscle strength in the way that they raise them in these pens. Wild salmon, folks, wild salmon are one of those, wild salmon's a keystone species. There's so many hundreds of species that rely upon wild salmon, everything from the bear to the tree, because the salmon swim way up the stream. Salmon have this very unique ability where they hatch, they'll swim thousands of miles and then come back to spawn right in that same exact spot in the stream. So the Bay of Fundy has these very turbulent waters, and they believe that the turbulent waters build the salmon muscle up, since salmon are just sitting there right in the fat. I'm sorry, that they're sitting there right in these pens building up all this fat content that they're not having time to so-called exercise. So just want to let you guys know that there's nothing special about organic farm salmon, organic Scottish salmon, Norwegian salmon, Faroe Island salmon, Chilean farm salmon, anything from the Southern Hemisphere is farmed, because salmon's not native to the Southern Hemisphere. Any salmon that comes from a farm, folks, avoid. If you can get containment salmon, that would be your next best choice after wild. But there's very, like I said, very few farms out there that are doing it. Norway's trying to give incentives and trying to go that direction. There are some salmon farms coming on to that. It costs about 5 to 7 times more to build an inland containment system. Because here's what happens, folks. Salmon farms just drop nets in the ocean, in the bays. They just drop nets in, and there's their salmon farm. And they put some stuff in there, the fish. They put the fish in there, and and they put pumps in there and this and that. For an inland containment system, you literally need to build a building, hoist a building, put a building up, put tanks in there, huge, massive tanks, have this water filtration system, and then have these pumps and these circulators. So you're mimicking the salmon out with enough room. So that's why it costs literally 7 times the price to build an inland containment system, which is why salmon farms don't do it. They don't do it because they know that there's 7 times $1 million to $7 million investment is like, what would you do? Well, of course, we're going to do $1 million investment. We'll just spend an extra $500,000 on marketing to make people think that we're making better salmon, to make people think that we're sustainable, to so-called make an organic certification, to so-called say that where this says they're spending a little bit of extra money on marketing, folks. That's the big difference right now in the farm salmon arena versus wild salmon. Is they have money to market, they have money to play with, and these massive companies like Cook Aquaculture and these really big companies, they go in there and they spend tons of money. They hire chefs, they hire Martha Stewart, they pay her tons of money. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the Cook Aquaculture one. Rick Moon's a spokesperson for it too, the chef. And I tried to confront Rick Moon 2 years ago in Vegas, and I walked into his restaurant. He was there. And I walked in, and they said he was gone. I spoke to a chef and gave him an earful about it. He was like, I didn't know any of this. And of course, Rick's not telling you, because Rick's not also telling you he's taking money from them. But Martha Stewart, she's out there promoting this farm salmon. And she's like, I never thought farm salmon was so clean and this and that. And she's sitting there cooking it up and with her affiliate program and her money and all that kind of stuff. And then she's out on the boat in Maine. I live over there, and there are the salmon farms over there. Look at that. These salmon yards are pristine, and they're in my backyard, and look at these beautiful things. Folks, if Martha Stewart stuck a GoPro camera or put scuba gear on and went underneath that farm, she would be shocked to see what's in there. Again, if you drove by a feedlot for beef, if you go to Colorado, to Montford, if you go to IBP, if you go to any of these big packers, and you drove by their feedlot and you saw 25% of the beef lying there dead in the fields, you would never eat that beef from that company again. You'd be like, all farm beef, all caged, consolidated feedlot beef is terrible. Folks, that's what's happening in the salmon world, but you don't see it. We don't see it. Martha Stewart doesn't see it, and she probably knows about it. She just doesn't want to admit it because, of course, folks, this is all business deals. People sell themselves out for money because this is all business. These farm salmon companies, these multinational conglomerates, these big companies that came out of Norway, these guys got big bucks to play. And for advertising, they come in and they know what they're doing. They know how to manipulate governments like the Canadian government. They know how to say, we're going to provide all these jobs and this and that. And it's just not the case. So if a restaurant says they're sustainable and they're putting farm salmon on the menu, speak up. Let them know that farm salmon is the farthest thing from sustainable. Have the chef call people that live in communities in these Canadian towns, Scottish towns, Faroe Islands, wherever it is. Have them talk to the people that actually live in these towns where the organic so-called salmon comes from. I saw an interview last year, Don Sanford, a huge activist in Scotland, and the bays there in the summertime, when the salmon die-off happens from these farms, from all the bays, the whole region just stinks. And I remember living in Colorado, when you'd go up towards Greeley to Montfort, towards the beef, you'd smell Montfort, 15, 20 miles away, because animals just, go to the bathroom all over the place, and it's just all over there. But in the salmon farms, they all these Scottish people were saying in these communities, like, you can smell the stench. It's everywhere. It's everywhere throughout these regions in Scotland. And the same thing happens in Canada. And I was talking to another activist, Bill Bryden. He's a regular on my YouTube channel. He's in Canada. He's like, Marcus, that stuff, the salmon fat, because when the salmon die off, the fat starts dissolving from the flesh and just like kind of floats in the water and all the scum. He goes, that stuff just cakes all over the bays, the rocks, the shores. It cakes everywhere, it layers it. He goes, and it's there. It's not, it just doesn't come off. It's just like fixed itself, this oily mess. And the water has like he was also talking about in the farms. Oh my gosh, he was talking about in the farms that they have to literally sit there with poles and poke to let gases out, because this film actually goes up and creates this barrier on the top of these salmon farms where no air gets out, right? It's blocking the air because it's oil and fat and it's all this stuff. And they have to sit there and actually, and he said it, Marcus, he goes, it's a terrible job to do this, but they get people there that actually take these poles and poke holes, and so the air can circulate. And he goes, it just releases all this gas and disgusting odors and everything from these salmon farms. So folks, farm salmon, I don't care where it's coming from. I don't care what they say when it's open pen net, when it's net open pen farmed in bays, in the ocean, quote unquote, in the wild, Faroe Islands. I don't care where it's coming from. They're having issues. They have issues. And if it's quote unquote organic, the organic certification that's what was supposed to be coming out says once you start giving them antibiotics, they can't be part of the certification. But they allow all these other medicines. They still allow medicine. So if you go on the USDA site for farm, the quote unquote the proposed organic farm salmon certifications or aquaculture certifications, they're allowing medicine still. They're still allowing all that. And so it's nothing like, folks, it's marketing. This is all marketing. So avoid farm salmon. Arctic char is a better option. If you're a chef out there saying, what do I do I don't want to buy, I can't buy wild year round, or I can't afford it, this or that. Arctic char is an inland containment system. Arctic char is what most seafood advocacy groups recommend in place of salmon when wild salmon's out of season. The good news is you can buy wild salmon year round. If it's frozen, high quality frozen farm salmon exists. Farm salmon has a very short season. It's like April 15th, May 15th, Aprilish May, actually May 15th, Copper River runs, and then you get the river runs and you get some ocean fish, and you go until September, October, and then the season shuts down. And very, very, very rarely do you get stuff like ocean caught troll king salmon, winter kings out of Alaska. It does exist, but it's really not heading out of Alaska. It's super, super pricey. If you ever want to know if farm salmon's really in season, like if you're in a restaurant and you're like, it's May 15th or April 15th or March 15th, and the restaurant's saying, well, I got fresh wild salmon. You go on Pike Place, the market in Seattle, you go on Pike Place's website, and if they're selling wild salmon, then wild salmon exists, fresh wild salmon, not refreshed. Refreshed means that it's been frozen and then thawed. But if they have a source for real wild, fresh, never frozen salmon, then it exists. And you can gauge by how much they're charging if you think the restaurants. I've run into restaurant tours. I'm like, yeah, I'm serving Yukon salmon. And it's like $16 on their menu. I'm like, well, Yukon salmon's like $30 a pound, whole fish. You clean it, this and that, you're selling it for 16. And then all of a sudden when you call them out on it, they're like, oh yeah, I made a mistake. It's not Yukon River. It's Canadian king salmon that's farm raised. I'm like, okay, that's what I thought, for like $6 a pound, $4 a pound, whatever it is. So farm salmon, don't get scammed. Super, super important. Folks, eat, learn, live. Talk to everybody later. Thanks for tuning in. Had a lot of people on Facebook, had a lot of people on Instagram. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you later.